Evans, Colorado, a small town nestled in the shadows of the Rocky Mountains, is the kind of place where the rhythm of life seems predictable. In this close-knit community, the changing seasons were often the biggest events of the year, and people lived their lives with the quiet assurance that they knew their neighbors. But in the early hours of January 1st, 2012, that illusion of predictability was shattered, leaving behind a tragedy that would haunt the town and ignite a controversy that persists to this day. The Fallis family was well known in Evans. Tom Fallis, a 33-year-old sheriff's deputy, was a respected figure in law enforcement. His wife Ashley was a 28-year-old mother of three, known for her infectious smile and loving nature. The couple appeared to have the perfect life: 3 beautiful children, a stable home, and the outward appearance of marital harmony. Yet, like so many stories that unfold behind closed doors, theirs was one fraught with tension, suspicion, and unspoken fears. New Year's Eve 2012 was meant to be a night of celebration. Ashley and Tom hosted a party at their home, inviting friends and family to ring in the new year with food, drinks, and laughter. The house was alive with the sounds of celebration, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, and the giggles of children playing in the background. But as the night wore on, a different, darker atmosphere began to take hold within the Fallis household. Ashley had been drinking that night, more than usual according to friends who were present. Her mood seemed to fluctuate between moments of forced gaiety and periods of visible distress. Those closest to her noticed her unease, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the way she seemed to be carrying a heavy burden. Some assumed it was just the alcohol, a natural reaction to the stresses of motherhood and the strains of marriage. But there were whispers that all was not well between Ashley and Tom. As the clock inched closer to midnight, signaling the end of one year and the beginning of another, the tension between the couple became palpable. Ashley confided in a friend, admitting that she was unhappy and felt trapped in her marriage. She spoke of the difficulties she was facing, the arguments that had become all too frequent, and her fears for the future. Her friend tried to console her, but Ashley's distress was clear. She seemed like a woman on the edge, teetering on the brink of despair. Midnight came, and with it, the customary celebrations. Guests gathered to watch the fireworks, but for Ashley there was no joy in the spectacle. Her mind was elsewhere, consumed by thoughts she couldn't shake. The festive atmosphere that had filled the house just hours before now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a suffocating tension that was impossible to ignore. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, the argument between Ashley and Tom escalated. The couple retreated to their bedroom, their voices rising in anger, cutting through the night. Those who remained in the house could hear the commotion, the sound of a marriage unraveling in real time. Then at 12:50 a.m., a single, deafening gunshot pierced the air, bringing the argument to a sudden and terrifying end. Panic erupted in the Fallis household. Tom burst from the bedroom, hysterical, carrying Ashley in his arms. Blood pooled around her head, her body limp and lifeless. Tom screamed for help, his voice raw with desperation. The scene was chaotic, with friends and family members rushing to help, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. Paramedics were called, and Ashley was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was done. The gunshot wound to her head was catastrophic, and she was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. Tom, who had been a figure of strength in his role as a deputy, was now a man broken by grief. He repeatedly told anyone who would listen that Ashley had taken her own life, that she had been struggling with depression, and that there was nothing he could have done to stop her. The initial investigation by the Evans Police Department seemed to corroborate Tom's account. The scene was chaotic and emotions were running high, but the officers who responded to the call were Tom's colleagues, people who knew him, trusted him, and had no reason to doubt his version of events. The case was quickly ruled a suicide, and the investigation was closed. But not everyone was convinced. Ashley's family was left reeling by her sudden death, and they struggled to reconcile the idea of her taking her own life with the woman they knew. Ashley had always been strong, they argued. She loved her children more than anything in the world, and the idea that she would leave them behind in such a violent manner seemed inconceivable. Moreover, there were no clear signs that she had been suicidal, There was no note, no prior attempts, no clear indication that she had been planning to end her life. As the days turned into weeks and the initial shock began to wear off, Ashley's parents, Jenna and Joel, grew increasingly suspicious. They knew their daughter, and they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with the official narrative. They began to piece together the events of that night, talking to friends who had been at the party, re-examining the evidence, and hiring their own experts to review the case. What they found was disturbing. The angle of the gunshot wound, they learned, was unusual for a self-inflicted shot. The bullet had entered Ashley's head at a downward angle, which was inconsistent with typical suicide cases. Moreover, the gun had been found on the bed, a significant distance from where Ashley's body had been discovered. This detail didn't fit with Tom's account of her death. Jenna and Joel also uncovered troubling reports from guests who had been at the party that night. Some of them had heard Ashley and Tom arguing violently before the gunshot. One witness even claimed to have heard Tom threatening Ashley, telling her that he would kill her if she ever tried to leave him. These accounts, combined with the inconsistencies in the physical evidence, led Ashley's family to a chilling conclusion. Ashley had not taken her own life. She had been murdered, and her killer was the very person who was supposed to protect her. The Fallis family's suspicions only grew when they learned that key pieces of evidence had been overlooked or ignored during the initial investigation. The trajectory of the bullet, the lack of gunpowder residue on Ashley's hands, and the reports of the couple's argument, all of these details should have raised red flags, but they had been dismissed or downplayed by the officers in charge. Undeterred, Ashley's parents pressed forward, refusing to let their daughter's death be brushed aside as just another tragic suicide. They hired a private investigator who quickly identified additional inconsistencies in the case. The investigator's findings were damning. There were no fingerprints on the gun that could conclusively prove that Ashley had pulled the trigger. The bullet's trajectory suggested that the shot could have been fired by someone standing above her, and the timeline of events, as described by Tom, was riddled with holes. The more they dug, the more Ashley's family became convinced that a terrible injustice had been done. They believed that Tom Fallis had killed his wife in a fit of rage, and that the Evans Police Department had covered it up, either out of loyalty to one of their own or sheer incompetence. Their determination to uncover the truth became a crusade, driven by their love for Ashley and their need for justice. In 2014, their relentless pursuit of the truth finally began to pay off. Michael Yates, a former detective who had been involved in the initial investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. Yates revealed that he had found evidence during the original investigation that suggested Ashley's death was not a suicide, but this evidence had been disregarded by his superiors. Yates claimed that the investigation had been compromised from the start, and he believed that key details had been intentionally suppressed to protect Tom Fallis. Yates's revelations were explosive, and they quickly caught the attention of the media. The Fallis case, once considered closed, was now back in the spotlight, and the Weld County District Attorney's Office was forced to take a closer look. In light of the new evidence, the DA reopened the investigation into Ashley's death, and this time they left no stone unturned. The reopened investigation was thorough, and it soon uncovered a series of damning details that had been overlooked during the initial inquiry. Forensic experts re-examined the scene, and their findings were unequivocal. The evidence did not support a conclusion of suicide. The trajectory of the bullet, the position of the gun, the lack of gunpowder residue on Ashley's hands, all of these factors pointed to a different scenario, one in which Ashley had not pulled the trigger herself. In addition to the forensic evidence, the investigators also uncovered new witness statements that further implicated Tom. Several people who had been at the party that night came forward, describing how they had heard Tom and Ashley arguing violently just before the gunshot. One witness claimed to have overheard Tom say, "If you leave me, I'll kill you." Another witness recalled seeing Tom emerge from the bedroom with blood on his hands, screaming that Ashley had shot herself. But the witness noticed something strange. Tom's demeanor was not one of shock or grief, but of cold, calculated control. On November 16, 2014, Tom Fallis was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in connection with his wife's death. The arrest sent shockwaves through Evans and beyond. The image of Tom Fallis, the devoted husband and dedicated law enforcement officer, was now shattered, replaced by the portrait of a man accused of committing the ultimate betrayal. The trial that followed was nothing short of a media spectacle. Every detail of the case was dissected in the court of public opinion, with pundits and commentators weighing in on the evidence, the witnesses, and the credibility of the accused. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who had been pushed to the brink by his own insecurities and anger. They argued that Tom had killed Ashley in a fit of rage during their argument that night, and then tried to stage the scene to look like a suicide. The defense, on the other hand, portrayed Tom as a loving husband who had been wrongfully accused. They argued that Ashley had been struggling with depression, that she had been drinking heavily that night, and that her death was a tragic but self-inflicted act. They pointed to the initial investigation, which had ruled her death a suicide, as evidence that Tom was innocent, and that the case against him was based on nothing more than speculation and circumstantial evidence. The trial was grueling, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. Witnesses took the stand, some supporting the prosecution's theory, others backing the defense. Friends and family members were torn, with some testifying that Ashley had been happy and stable, while others claimed she had been struggling with depression and marital problems. But it was the forensic evidence that proved to be the most compelling, casting serious doubt on the defense's claims. Forensic experts testified that the physical evidence did not support a conclusion of suicide. They explained that the trajectory of the bullet, the position of the gun, and the lack of gunpowder residue on Ashley's hands were all inconsistent with a self-inflicted gunshot. The prosecution argued that the evidence pointed to only one conclusion. Tom had shot Ashley, either in the heat of the moment or in a calculated act of violence, and then attempted to cover it up. As the trial drew to a close, the jury was left with the daunting task of sifting through the evidence and determining the truth. They deliberated for days, weighing the conflicting testimonies and the complex forensic evidence. The community of Evans held its breath, waiting for a verdict that would either vindicate or condemn the man at the center of the storm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury reached a verdict: not guilty. The courtroom erupted in shock. For Ashley's family, the verdict was a crushing blow. They had fought so hard for so long to bring the truth to light, only to see the man they believed responsible for their daughter's death walk free. Tom Fallis, though acquitted, would forever carry the stigma of suspicion, his life and reputation irreparably damaged by the ordeal.